and welcome to our final superstar panel for this great event here. And I get to stand among giants here on the stage for a second. This is our super broker panel. Everybody in the back, please move toward the front. I know we got a lot of seats still. And to head this up and moderate it, one of our two fellow SIORs here on the stage, Jay Olshansky, president of NAI Global. Take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're going to get going because we got some travel schedules, and we're also the last thing before the bar, so we know how that is. I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to kick it off with a question. And I'm going to go to my left, or that would be to your right. Darcy Stakem is Vice Chairman, CBRE, here in New York City. Mitchell Steer is Chairman, CEO, Saville Studley, here in New York City. Steve Siegel, Chairman, Global Brokerage of CBRE. And last is Bruce Mosler, Chairman, Global Brokerage. Round of applause for them.
CBRE.
Last but not least.
There you go.
That's what I was going to say.
So I figure all I have to do is just tip it down the hill, and then they'll take over from here. But I want to start with Bruce down the other end. And about 8 years ago, you and I shared a pizza in your office, and we were talking about the consolidation of brokerage and how the firms were getting bigger. And you made a very profound statement that I think is applicable to everyone here, that we're all at large firms, all 5 of us. Bigger isn't better. Better is better. So with that, talk about
Steve wants me to say out loud to all of you that I stole that from him, and I did.
Okay.
I'm here to acknowledge in truth, but it is a good leader who can borrow from someone who has a better thought than he or she at the time. And let me let you finish your question. I had to give Steve the credit.
Well, the question is the impact of the superstar broker, past and present, in the ever-changing landscape. What are your opinions of that? Is it going to be the same as it's been in the past? Will it be the same in the future? We'll kick it off with that one. I'm sure that'll lead to...
Well, I'm glad I got a very narrowly focused question that gives me no room to sort of opine in broad brush strokes. Look, I think this industry continues to change all the time. And when we sat down, we were seeing, I think, the beginning of a pretty dramatic consolidation amongst a certain part of the industry. When you look at the major players today, and we can debate who they are all day long, but the global players today still, from an overall percentage of who's in the real estate business, represent a relatively small percentage of the total pie. Having said that, our clients are what, at the end of the day, are driving businesses to have multiple service lines, be it facilities management, appraisal, brokerage, both capital markets and leasing, consultative services, and frankly, the full range of corporate services, which means everything from portfolio management to placing your furniture in a particular office. These are, we respond to and hopefully can be somewhat proactive to our clients' needs. But the sophistication of the business is driving, I think, the change that we're seeing. So we can expect more globalization. And in the same moment, I still think there's room for niche players who can provide attention, mostly in their backyard, because the multinational players, I think public companies require a different level of service today to meet their governance standards. I'll leave it. We can go on and on about this.
Mary, I thought you were talking super brokers like us.
So did I.
I mean, I'm out of it. I prepared for that for weeks.
We can go in any direction the super brokers want to go in.
There will be super brokers, period. As long as decisions regarding real estate are at the CFO or above level, there is not a question that a superpower or a super broker with the length and breadth of services that are required today, everything from workplace strategy to labor analytics, et cetera, And the process is a longer one than any of us have ever seen in the past. That kind of support can only exist in a larger firm with the type of coverage and the services needed. I respect Bruce. The boutique type firm will fill a niche, but it'll also be niche business. They'll never threaten the big assignments, the pitches for those, or the RFPs go out. And I don't think that's just today. I think that's as far out as you could see.
Mitchell, you want to keep going on this, on your thoughts? Or?
Well, I mean, I don't want to beat the horse too severely, but I would say Saville-Studley, we look at ourselves as kind of, the best of both. While we're a global power at this point, we still in New York, still in the U.S., we function really as Studley, which, as many of you know, we're on the tenant side of the ledger, and we don't represent property owners or landlords. And we think that that's a service that puts us in a little different niche from the CBs and the Cushman and Wakefields. And this isn't meant to be an advertisement for our
Sounds
company.
a little bit
Sound-
like
it
it,
sound a
though,
little
Mitch. I don't know. It does. It really does.
Sound a little bit like Trump.
We're a little different.
It's not a format for
No, but it's
promotion.
They're both afraid whenever he shows up with a tenant, though.
Well, that's very kind, Darcy. But I guess I'm echoing what they're saying, but there's different ways of providing the service, and there's different business models to the super broker model.
True, but that will still be a super broker, whatever model it is.
Yeah. And I thought, like you, Steve, that they were talking more individually.
Yeah, whether the individual will survive the global corporate service, the procurement groups within the client base.
It's very, those of us, which I guess is all of us, unfortunately, that sort of were in the business late 70s, early 80s, throughout the 80s. We had friends that went off to form their own companies or try to make it on their own, and didn't have the benefit or the backing of a major firm and the resources that they had to offer. And it's very, very tough to do major work for a major corporation or a major partnership without the backing and the service that a big super broker has to bring to bear to the process. That's just a fact, I think.
Doris, we should get you
Yeah, look,
in on
I
this.
made my earlier comment about Mitch, because the one thing I hear about him is that he's relentless in negotiating for his clients. And I can look at my own team now and tell you who I think the super brokers are coming up out of that. Why? Because they negotiate more relentlessly, they're better with people, they listen harder, they follow the systems that we've set up, but then add and innovate to them. They just don't take okay for an answer. I think super brokers transcend every industry. In the tech industry, we all know the names that have risen to the top. So I don't see why our industry is suddenly going to just be a whole level of, just good, great, and not, at the very tippy top trying to be different.
So when you think about we have an audience of mainly brokers here, and they're from all over the world and all over the United States, and they're in certainly smaller markets than, let's say, a Manhattan or a tri-state New York area. Would that apply to each individual market, that you can be a super broker in your location without some of the different things that you've all mentioned?
It depends on the size of the market, the size of the requirements. A smaller second or third tier city will probably not have that size requirement that demands demands a level of services. I mean, they're not going to do workplace strategy to redefine their uses in a 10 or 20,000 foot tenant.
That was your pitch when you stole that tenant from me.
Which one? I've stolen a couple lately.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Apparently it worked, I mean.
But seriously, occasionally you'll have a satellite of a large corporation, but there too, because we're dealing with one in Raleigh, North Carolina, they don't ask for any of that level of service for a 70,000 square foot requirement in Raleigh. They want someone that knows the market, So there, I think a niche player would have a better chance of securing business because it might come from a very defined personal relationship.
Now, Darcy, you're really more on the capital market side of the business, and certainly, Mitchell's more on the, let's say, the tenant side of the business. How is the super broker or the top broker get broken into specialties? Because you have people that have share, let's say in Manhattan, or you have people that travel, as Steve was saying, go across lines and follow the client. But maybe from a capital markets point of view, give some insight to how you've gotten to where you've become a super broker in that regard, and touch on that, because it's a niche, certainly, and not everyone plays in it.
Look, I fell into it, quite honestly, because I didn't want to work for Dad anymore 2 years into the business, because I got sick of trying to negotiate commission splits with him. So, so I went downstairs to what became the Capital Markets Group, but was not at the time. And today, I entered it, and I used to think, wow, I didn't have to do all that Argus and everything, but I remembered I actually ran all this stuff on like accounting paper with a calculator. So in a way, I got much better training, because I can still, to this day, piss off anybody on my team and go, in the 6th year, on the 8th line, there's a mistake. 5 minutes into the cash flows. But I think now you do have to enter with more numbers-based, all these deals, and I think even smaller deals in smaller markets often will have partnerships. You got to understand the debt. There's a lot to it, but you can get in and just concentrate. I've been able to not have to fully concentrate in New York, so I have a team that does residential, I have a team that does office, and I have a specific team that just handles international relationships, because all of those things matter now. And you just constantly have to reinvent yourself and move forward and push, 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 and never take yesterday as today's answer.
Bruce?
I think it's really important to focus on a couple of things that define super anything. In our industry, and I think Darcy touched upon this, and I want to expand on it, you're not a super broker or a super anything unless you surround yourself with the necessary talent. The business has become extremely sophisticated. Everything is balance sheet driven. In the case of what Darcy does day in, day out on the debt equity side, or mainly the equity side, it's the pro forma and how you underwrite to that and how you sell the story. In our business, it's tailoring solutions to balance sheet needs in almost every instance. And in that way, let's be clear that the super broker, the mega broker, the whatever, is surrounded by a team of people. That's a fundamental change than where we were a decade ago, or maybe even 5 years ago, in terms of how we work. You mentioned it, Steve, and I think it's real important. We're doing logistics, we're doing labor analysis, we're doing all kinds of balance sheet gyrations to see which best suits that particular company's needs and objectives. Those things in each and every instance is a different person, part of the super broker's team. The super broker today, I think, is a conductor who knows how to strategize, how to direct the strategy to achieve the solution. So the work we do is different, and it will continue to be different, and we'll have to change to accommodate that.
I'm just going to interject one thing. The only exception I take to that is there's a timeline on all these transactions now, where you're supposed to be in 3 to 6 months, where you are in 6 to 12. When do you engage the market? When do you have the RFP process? And the people sitting on this stage, whether it's Darcy with the sales side, and she is definitely the orchestrator, the best war rooms than any sales broker has anywhere in this business. When we get to that last 10 or 15 yards towards the end of a transaction, where there's negotiation, a la what Darcy said about Mitch, where there's relationships that are required with landlords, where there's credibility that has been established, that's where the individual super broker comes in. And that individual super broker, in my opinion, will remain important no matter how long this business exists.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, that's the closing aspect of it.
Yeah,
I agree with
and just to follow up on what's being said, we're not in the, real estate is our product, but we're in the advice business. We're not in the space selling business. We're in the business of of, much like investment banking today, giving our best advice that impact, corporate P&Ls by hundreds of millions of dollars over time. And that's where the super broker, as Steve is saying and as Bruce was talking about earlier, you've got to have all the pieces, but there's got to be an individual at the head of that team that has the presence, that can bring the parties together, that can get through the tough moments, that can strategize as we're coming towards the 20-yard line. I think the great brokers will probably tell you that they can see the finish line before the process starts.
Yep.
It's just, you got to play it out, and you got to go through the motions, because it's how you manage that process, because I don't think there's a client out there who wants to be told the answer when you start.
No.
They want to have a great listener, someone who understands their issue, someone who feels can tailor the appropriate solution, but someone who can take it down the field and get it closed for them.
Agreed.
I'll just comment on my side. On the sales side, I can 3 out of 10 times predict the ultimate buyer, but oftentimes I cannot, because there's always a new source of capital, a new way of putting a deal
Well, you have
together.
more buyers.
A new country coming in.
You're
So
starting.
Yeah,
I
you
always
have-
have to have
you
a
have
very
so-
open mind.
You have so many more buyers than client
do-
and
than
tenants.
we do
And tenants
alternatives.
have
No, I know.
alternatives,
I'm just
yeah.
saying,
that's
it's
right.
pointing out it's
Yeah.
different.
It's funny that Mitch said that, because we're getting into a later stage of an assignment that we're working. And I had written down for
You need some
part of the
help?
team, I'll let you know, I'll call you
Thank
tomorrow.
Thank you.
And we wrote down beforehand, each of us, what we thought would happen. And as Mitch says, the scenario that I laid out and one of my partners laid out on the transaction is pretty much where it appears like it's going to end up. But as he said also, we've gone through 14 months of all the detail and support for that ultimate decision. So,
Right, and you have to.
You have to prove out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
And in this room, you have to fight a lot of things along the way. You got to fight the cynicism. You got to, sometimes you say, okay, here I go, I'm putting a cassette in my mouth again. Over. I mean, I'm just sort of, under the sheets, but it's a process. It's a process, and executing the large deals is an incredible process, incredible. But you need the stars to make neighborhoods, to make the big buildings sing, to lease the big buildings, create developments. That just doesn't happen because someone decides to build a building somewhere and people show up.
exactly.
Let's switch, because I think a lot of people would be interested in kind of how you've gotten to this position. And one of the things, all of us up here are 30 plus years in the business, and we've seen a lot of change in those 30 years. If you go back 30, 35 years ago, there was no technology. As you mentioned, it was on a piece of paper. So when you look at this, how did you evolve to this? And because I think people are in the room here sitting going like, I would like to be like one of the 4 of you. And maybe some advice you would give so people in their careers in brokerage could move in the direction that you have. And maybe also share, without giving away trade secrets, where you see it going and what you're doing to adapt to where it's going. You want to start, Darcy?
Sure. I was lucky enough to be out at the Desert concert. Took my husband out and some friends for his birthday, and turns out I'm sitting next to a developer from Washington, D.C., and his son works at a rival brokerage house, and so the son's in capital markets. He said, oh, can I talk to you? So we're talking, and he's like, well, it's a little bit, now it's this firm's turn, and then it's this firm's turn, and then it's this firm's turn. And I'm thinking, well, he works for the competition, so I'm not setting him straight, but I'm thinking, my God, I would never act that way. I don't care what the odds are against me. I am going hell-bent for leather to land that listing, period. And that's just always been a drive inside of me. What's next? What's next? What's next? It's never good enough. I've never sold enough. We've sold a lot. I'm proud we hold every record in New York City. But that's why we will hold every record in New York City, because it's never good enough. And I think that's one thing in any market. You can be 1,000% convinced it is not your listing, but I'll promise you this, the person who's convinced it's their listing is going into their pitch and they're not going to do a good pitch. They're going to be very average at best because they know it's their listing. You go in there and you tear it up and you do everything they're not expecting, and you got an excellent shot of walking out with that listing. So that would be my best advice.
I think on a more general basis, our business, you said 30 years ago, our business crossed the Mason-Dixon line, if you will, when we self-policed the level of service and we cleaned up our act and kind of differentiated ourselves from, ooh, that's a great looking piece of space, and began to create a strategic solution. But it was almost parallel with corporations realizing that the second biggest expense on their books was their real estate. And all of a sudden it came up from the real estate director in the dark office with a painted window, or the purchasing department that handled real estate, to the CFO and above. And the higher it went in the corporation, the higher the level of service had to become. I mean, a term sheet today, preamble to a lease being drawn, is 2 or 3 times the size as a lease was 20 years ago. And so it's meeting demand and your own inner demand.
But interesting that you say that, because the creation and invention of a term sheet, and I think those at the head of the curve were doing that before, the industry was doing it.
Before the demand.
Yeah, before. That made the lease anticlimactic.
Yes.
The more homework you do on the front end, then the less risk there is in the back end, which is closing and earning your fee. We talk about, how do you get there? I think, you start out, you've got to sort of look in the mirror and you say, okay, who do I want to be? What do I need? What do I not possess to get where I want to go? And listen, we all had the good fortune of starting our careers here in New York. So you got the biggest, it's the good fortune, and it's there, but as Julian Studley used to say many years ago, it's not like they're putting the money in the street for you to go pick up. It's, the big deals and the big fees are here, but the competition is incredible. I can't even describe what you have to go through just to be awarded an assignment. I mean, that's as good as it gets. Obviously working the deal and closing is terrific, but just winning the business is a big win. But for me, getting back to when I started, in the total focus. You just, I knew what I wanted to go for, and it was just blinders, focus, figure out how to be the best, do whatever I had to do to outthink, outwork the competition.
I think I think most of what I would like to have said has been said, but I'm going to add a couple things. Great mentorship is an exceptional way to catapult yourself forward. I had the blessing of having several mentors along the way, including this guy, whom when you have the ability to pick their brain, get their time, get their expertise, it moves the needle exponentially instead of incrementally. So mentorship is, I think, a spectacular way to move forward. I think the second thing is, and Mitch touched on this and Darcy did as well, it's extremely important to understand that nothing comes easily. So you have to be totally dedicated to your craft, and that means not 24/7, but you do have to be thinking about your business most of the time. How to improve yourself. What education do I lack that I need so that I can provide a certain level of advice? This is an advice business. So re-educating yourself, always tuning up to what you probably have some shortcomings in, knowing your shortcomings and improving them is critical. The platform. We started with this conversation about how the business has changed, and Steve touched on this. If you don't have and aren't part of an organization that doesn't have the tools necessary to compete in today's environment, you will not win. When I talk about a niche player, that is exactly what it should be defined as. Once in a while, you may get that good fortune because you have the relationship, because the requirement is niche. On balance, you must have a outstanding platform behind you to succeed. And in the final analysis, I would say that, as Darcy said, it's no deal should ever be considered good enough for you to say, I'm going to hang my hat now. That's just not in the cards. You constantly have to keep moving forward, thinking about the next deal, the next requirement, and love that competition. This is a competitive environment. And, you know, second place is the first place loser. At the end of the day, you've got to want to win.
Second place is
Second
as
place,
good as
sorry, I
last
said that
place.
backwards.
Second place is no place.
No place.
Winning is everything.
I'll say just one more
You
thing
didn't
on the
remember your
subject.
other phrase.
I'll teach them later.
You got to be, for me,
No,
I think you have to be 100% prepared, even when you walk into just the first casual meeting. If I don't have the time to fully prepare and scrub everything before I go to a meeting, I postpone the meeting, because that may be the one and only opportunity you get.
Yeah,
And that's where technology is such a gift, right? You can look up everybody you're meeting with, you can look up what they own, you can look up if they finance, you can look up do they use third-party agents, and you can get a world of information off of the internet that helps you for when you first walk in. And I think that's true at every market, every level. You know, you really can access a lot of information.
But not in the cab on the way to the
No.
meeting.
I
as
tell
Mitch has said.
people,
Right, yeah.
I tell people that I do mentor that you should go into a meeting knowing as much or more than the person you're meeting with. You can surprise them with information. And we had a guy years ago, I'm talking 20, 25 years ago, without the technology that Darcy's referring to, that would study every aspect of a company before he would go to a meeting or agree to a meeting. And he found that any way he could, I mean, I don't care if it was 10Ks or whatever it is, at the end of the day, he went in there brilliantly prepared. And as that expression goes, you only have one time to make a great first impression. And he nailed it, and he's one of the top or super brokers for a sustained period of time in our business. I would also venture to guess, and I haven't done statistics, but I believe everyone here would agree with me. In the last, if you just pick 5 years, I would bet that 90%, if not more than that, of large outsourced tenant assignments went to the same 5 firms, and everyone else got the rest.
That's going to be...
And that's our 3 firms
even
plus JLL and Newmark. I
Yep.
can't imagine. I don't compete against the niche firms or some of the other quote-unquote nationals that are not really nationals. Not your firm.
You all mentioned
Nice guy.
that it's a lot of...
No, man, I didn't.
I gotta teach him manners. He meant what he said,
I
folks.
meant I didn't mean his firm. He's the exception to that.
Thank you. I'll take the exception. Anytime Mr. Siegel makes an exception for me, I'm good. So you mentioned that it's a lot of preparedness, a lot of work, a lot of time. You never want to lose. There's never a deal you shouldn't chase. You're kind of pissed off if you're coming second place, which is all understood. So how do you manage your time? And I remember, Steve, I think you told me this, and Eddie Gordon used to always say, there's no such thing as family at home. It's all work. So talk about work-life balance and managing your time, reinventing yourself, which I know Mr. Gordon used to reinvent himself all the time.
Yeah, well,
and I think each of you have reinvented yourselves a few times.
You have to move and reinvent yourselves. I did not agree. That's one area Eddie and I disagreed on. And he actually felt that way about everyone who worked for him, not himself. He had quite an outside life in addition to the business. But what he really meant, and what we all mean, is you have to give a hell of a lot more focus to the business to maintain a certain level of success than perhaps the average person who doesn't prioritize it. And I tell people who work for us, if you come to work, you wake up in the morning and you're not pushing yourself out that door, bashing down to get to work, enthusiastic about what you're doing, and if you're looking at the clock to see what time you're going to get the hell out of there, then you're in the wrong business. And even if you're making money, because our business can be deceptive in terms of somebody can be making what appears to be and is a decent amount of money, but they're not achieving their full level of success. Therefore, in my opinion, they're failing. So And then, yes, Eddie said you had to reinvent yourself. If you're in first place, you got to keep changing, or you won't be in first place eventually. So.
Others, how have you changed
Well,
yourselves, or how, you know?
I'll just say early on in my career, let's say the first 10, 12 years, I mean, I never took a personal call. I think time management is critical. I mean, all we've got is our time. And in some ways, you know, when you start out, or, you know, when you're trying to make it go, you're living, you sort of, who could get into a business like this? How do you possibly get into a business, support a family where you're always on commission? You know, it's like incredible insecurity. I mean, how do you deal with it? And you know, what's interesting is we have incredible security. I mean, because as long as you're good at what you do, it's tough to get laid off. It's tough to get fired. You know, all you have to do is go report to yourself every day in many ways and just go out and do what you got to do. So, listen, at this point in my career, I obviously say hello to my family and do things and enjoy myself a little more. But early on, it was all work. It was all work.
I never really entertained outside of the office. No breakfasts, no lunches, no dinners, no entertaining, nothing. I was like, I just went hardcore at the work and differentiating myself through knowledge of the market research, et cetera. And then my husband and I decided to have kids. So then I had raising two daughters. Never lived more than 20 blocks from work, never. You can get home like that. You can get to the client, the kids went to school in the city. You can get to the parent conferences. Nanny's sick, you can get home. None of that stress. I removed it completely from my life. And then finally, I built a team because I was like, I want to be able to take a vacation and actually enjoy myself. And ultimately, one of the funny things with Trump running is my daughter, I remember picking up the phone finally on one vacation and going, Mr. Trump, my mom is on vacation, click. And you really just have to make decisions and figure out that balance. But the best thing I did from that point of view was build a team that could let me, to an extent, take a vacation. Because when you're lead on a deal, the client wants you whether you're on vacation or not.
Yeah, I think building a team, and I think, as Darcy says, for us, living or making the decision to stay in the city when you're starting families. My wife and I were at the crossroads of not doing that, and she said, you'll go to work, the kids will be sleeping, you'll come home, they'll be sleeping. And I was able to get up, have breakfast with them, come home even before I had a dinner, a fundraiser or some other business-related dinner. I could get home and read them a story or spend some time with them, go to the dinner and come back home, and they'll be sleeping, but I was there. And I had to do a lot of traveling, so it was important for me when I was there to be there. So you can have, maybe you don't call it a balanced life, but you certainly make room for the right things.
It's an extraordinary industry because Mitch touched on this, Darcy's touched on this, the great one has touched on this. The reality is that while you have independence on one level, which is to say that you do have to have the discipline to define your workday. Your time management is the most important ingredient to whether you succeed or fail in having good judgment and what you work on, the team you surround yourself with, the platform that you have to pick the tools from. Those are all judgment things. At the end of the day, it is an unforgiving business, though. Let's be clear in that if you do not win and execute, you do get left behind. This business grades you every day. Well, maybe every day is a bit strong, but you are graded out at the end of the year in black and white terms in terms of whether or not you are succeeding in executing business for yourself, your family, and on behalf of the firm. Now, the business has sophisticated up enough that we have many moving parts, and so for those people that want to be on the consultative side, or those people that want to be on the appraisal side, or those people that want to be in corporate services, there's room for lots of people who have a love of real estate. So while we're talking about the mega brokers and the mega superstars, there are superstars emerging in other parts of our business that have a different potential lifestyle attachment to it, that have a different set of disciplines attached to it, there's more to offer. But be clear, success doesn't happen easily. You all know that. Part of why you're here is to listen to what it takes, but you know what it takes. So it's an extraordinary discipline in brokerage, but I remind you, for what we do, the four of us, the grade is in pretty much on a daily basis as to whether or not you're moving the ball ahead.
I think the stars in any business, or sports for that matter, are not just the ones with the most talent, but the ones with the most talent who work the hardest. The combination has to be there.
We talked a lot about team. We talked about sometimes your quarterback or team leader. How do you build teams? How do you attract teammates? How do you retain teammates? How do you reward teammates? Want to start?
Well, I told you my least favorite 5 words in the English language when strung together are, can I have 5 minutes? I mean, somebody's quitting, somebody's pregnant, somebody's, you name it, divorcing, whatever. I think our firm has done an amazing job of building a super team that exists outside the leasing brokers in its consulting department. So a lot of the top brokers don't actually have a necessarily dedicated team. I do, and you do it by trial and error. I have a person that was my admin and is now a real producer on my team. I have another admin that is now an associate broker and moving up nicely. I've just employed one of my best friend's daughters and she's coming out of Brown University, and I'm telling you, rock star. Already, and it's not been a long time. We hire people we put people into the summer internship program. You guys can do this, even if it comes out of your own pocket. We take 5 to 6 every summer. We pit them against each other, and one person comes out with a job, and boy, do they rise to the occasion.
Yeah, but it has to be a real program. I mean,
Right,
it's not
but
just
we also run our own program
go to the room
within
and
it.
canvas or.
Yeah, look, the best thing we do is we do this food challenge, and it's hysterical to watch how they handle it and solve the problems. And so you just gotta, but then we also just hired a guy from an acquisition department over at another firm of 10 years. To solve our debt problem, we took 2 investment bankers out of Deutsche Bank. So, be creative, be open-minded in building a team.
You also get to a point in your career where you recognize talent, you have an instinct for it. It's not
And
just
talent
about
comes to you.
Yes,
to
seek
direct.
out the association. It's not just about education or experience necessarily. It's an instinctive thing. It's a drive. You can probably pick up a sense of somebody's energy level and drive just from maybe not 5 minutes of your time, but certainly within a 30 or 45-minute discussion with them. And you kind of pick and choose, and as Darcy says, it's trial and error. Sometimes you don't get the right person, and you have to.
Sometimes
get the
that
next
drive
one.
just means they're walking out the door in 2 years, so it is better to have that time to kind of assess. And if you know their family or you know the person that they're a client's son or daughter, that can help too.
Okay, so what I'll add is we know you've got to be a good leader, and in order to be a good leader, you've also got to be, for people to be able to look up to you, you've got to be pretty good at your craft so people want to work for you. And the last piece is, or not the last piece, but an important piece for me, and I think for those that are successful, is that you've got to know how to balance the money with the people. And I always say that the rubber meets the road when it's time to do the billing. And that's when you're there and the people that work for you know you're there to treat them fairly and take care of them, and that's how you grow together. Or you're not that way and you'll burn through them and you got to start all over again. And it's a function of, where do you want to go? What do you want to build? How do you want to create it? And I always looked at the world that if I was just going to do this 1 or 2 deals, I wasn't going to be very successful. So before I was successful, I pretended I was successful, and I divided the money as if I was successful, because I just figured that if I had great people and I wanted to keep them, and I wanted to build something great, That was an important ingredient in order to get there.
You took it all?
I took it all. Yeah.
I keep notes of every financial interaction I have with everybody on my team. Did they smile? Did they say thank you? Were they grateful? Did they always negotiate for more? I treat them like a deal. I have absolute records so that when I go into the next discussion about pay, I look them all over and I'm ready for them.
Well, as we all know, everyone involved with the deal was the reason why it happened.
Absolutely.
You know?
I will.
The sum of the parts add up to 220%.
Right. So I said we would have no problem dividing this bill if we could all get 60 points.
But on a kind of maybe wrap it up, bring it together note, I think it's really important to know that success and sustaining success are two different things.
Right.
To sustain success, I think Mitch made a really important point. You have to compensate your people fairly and well. That's the only way that people want to stay with you and continue to achieve and contribute more to the overall team. The blessing of a great team is two things. First of all, hopefully people that have some different skill sets than you do. I try to surround myself with
Hopefully they
people-
remember you when you want to retire.
and hopefully they remember you when you want to retire.
Sorry to
but
interrupt.
I'm not so sure. At the end of the day, different skill sets matter because not all of us do all things exceptionally well. The great closer may not be the great person to run through the entire process. So different skill sets I think matter, and making sure at the end of the day that you are rewarding people well for what they do ensures that you sustain your success.
Excellent. We have time for one or two very short questions, and we know that there probably are some. So Gabriel's going to grab the mic and bring it over. But why don't you go ahead? We can probably hear you.
I can't see anything.
Go ahead. You can ask, and then while he'll
We'll
get-
repeat the question.
Thank you. I'm Gonzo from Mexico, Cushmanagüey, Mexico. In all your successful career, I imagine that in any point you made some mistakes to achieve the top, to be different of the others. What would you recommend us to avoid doing? I mean, what kind of accidents we can have in our way to the top that you recommend us to stay away?
That assumes you can avoid making mistakes. I'm not so sure.
You can't avoid
It's
making.
a great question. We should repeat the question.
The question was,
then
what,
take it, buddy.
what advice would the panel have on avoiding the mistakes that they have made as they've gone, so you and the audience wouldn't make the same mistakes? So let me start with this. I encourage everyone that works for me to make mistakes. Because if you're not trying hard and you don't fall and you actually don't get back up and try again, you're never going to get there. So we will make mistakes, but I'll throw it to the panel.
Well,
Don't make the simple assumptions that, you don't have to over-prepare. I think there's the constant mistakes that some people make of just not over-preparing all the time, because you just have to understand there's always going to be, maybe it's not the same people all the time, but somebody's coming in over-prepared. But my biggest mistakes have all led to my biggest next level of successes. And boy, were they painful and brutal, and I wish I didn't have to live through them, but they really did make me a better broker.
Yeah.
You can't avoid making mistakes because you don't know you're making the mistake until you make it. And I believe that the best way to learn how to do something right in this business is to make a mistake and learn from it.
Right.
There's no way to avoid them. You're going to make mistakes.
And I'll add one thing. When you make a mistake, and we all have more than once, acknowledge it. Acknowledge it internally, and if you're dealing with a client, acknowledge it externally
To the client.
as quickly as possible,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
that way you move on.
Go take
You
your
pay the
beating
consequence,
quickly.
but move on. So the one sort of takeaway I'll give you is when you make the mistakes, and you will, acknowledge them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll just add, try not to make the same mistake again.
Twice.
So, yeah, twice as.
Yeah. Okay.
How many are still married, and how many have you been divorced?
How many times?
I'll start. I'm 31 years, still married.
First marriage, 32 years.
Yeah,
You don't need their answers.
no, I'm actually, I don't know if the hesitation was you thought I was going to say 4 or I'm still on my first marriage. I'm married 31 years and 2 kids. First wife, first and only. Not that I've met her.
Go ahead,
I'm
Steve.
married roughly 100 years, if you add them all up. I'm on my third. I'm on my third and spectacular wife for 30 years. I have 4 kids, 20 years apart.
Yeah, and his wife is spectacular. And I'm on my first wife, 33 years or 4, I'm not sure exactly. 2
I'm
kids.
telling Wendy.
2 kids. Don't tell Wendy.
Telling Wendy.
2 spectacular kids. And I will say this, because I know everybody on this panel has had the same struggle. When you are at the peak of your career, or even today, when you hope you're still at the peak, but as you experience different jobs and otherwise, when this man was chief executive for a long time, and I for a reasonably long time, when you're putting 180 or 200 days a year on the road in, it's a challenge. The sort of guideline I set for myself is no matter where I was in the world, building out the business platform, I would be home on Friday so that we would have the weekend together no matter what. It's an excuse, but it worked in the sense that my kids always knew when I would be there, even if I was traveling at the peak of it. It's a challenge. But,
Last question. Steve?
Thanks for watching you guys all really for many years and the extraordinary success that you found, I guess globally, but watching you here in New York, it's remarkable how far the type of deals that you process, so different than what I'm used to. And many years ago, we only spoke to people on the telephone and by visiting them. And as you get down towards and I know now there's plenty of emails and texts and no contact personally. As you get to the end of a negotiation between a landlord and a tenant, do you find that it's imperative to end up in a sit-down, in a difficult situation, or you still handle things electronically, and how has that changed how you're handling things?
I've never had a negotiation electronically, and I'm working on a few assignments now. I have weekly meetings in person on each and every one of them with all hands on deck. I mean, you would think there's nothing to say week to week, but a transaction is a fluid event, and it's just constantly changing. The market moves in certain directions. And there's no such thing as an electronic process. The electronic or the technology obviously adds to it, builds up the support materials you need, but everything's delivered in person.
You email your spouse, your kids, your friends, and it's amazing how they interpret your email or your text. And sometimes you're like, wait a minute, I didn't mean that. So I do very, very little, mostly by phone, a ton in person. Really try to avoid electronic as much as humanly possible.
Yep.
I just want to add one thing apropos the sort of quality of life and success thing in the big picture. Everybody on this stage, whom are very dear friends, have a sincere and significant give back to the community in which they live and work. And at the end of the day, success isn't defined just by the deals that you do, and building your brand, if that's what you want to call it, isn't done by the deals alone. It's done by what you do in the community. And I really believe that's a significant part of what you should be thinking about as you look towards the future. Build your brand, do your deals, but also give back.
And you might worry that could cross a line, but Tony Malkin, owner of the Empire State Building, I really wanted him to get involved in the charity. I'm vice president of Bette Midler's charity, New York Restoration Project, and I really wanted him or his wife Shelley on the board. And I thought, look, this could cost me the next deal, but I'll live with it. It's made us so much closer, and we actually do more together now because he sees me giving back, and they want to give back, and So it is a really good idea.
I want to thank Darcy, Mitchell, Steve, and Bruce. Round of applause.